Welcome to another episode Out of the Blank podcast. I'm with Vic.
Hi, and thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Vic, okay, it's going to be a tough question, all right? What's on your mind, or would you prefer to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Vic Ferrari. I'm a Bronx kid, born and raised in New York City. I always wanted to become a police officer and an NYPD detective. When I was a little boy in the early 70s, I begged my parents to take me to see PG and R-rated movies like The French Connection and Dirty Harry. And I wanted to be a cop. I wanted to be a detective. I wanted to be a cop. And it's not that my parents were against it, but they were, at 5 years old, and that's what your kid just keeps going with. They're like, well, don't you want to go to school? Don't you want to do this? My dad was actually pushing me to be an electrician. And I was like, no, I wasn't having it. So when I was about 18, 19, I took the test. I passed. I, went through everything and became an NYPD cop. I worked in the South Bronx. I was on patrol for a while. Probably 15 out of my 20 years, I was in plainclothes. I worked in a variety of units from anti-crime, which targets pickpockets, and you're kind of not deep undercover, but you observe crime in progress and just kind of move in. I also worked in the narcotics division for a while. And my last 10, I was a detective in the NYPD's organized crime division, specifically the auto crime division, which we targeted stolen vehicles, chop shops, stolen vehicles being exported out of the country, sophisticated car theft rings. And, if homicides or commercial burglaries fell into the mix, we would target these organized crews. I retired about 15 years ago and I got into writing. And I just started writing books about my experiences about the New York City Police Department. It's worked out well for me.
What experiences, for instance, give me like a experience that you would put in one of your books?
Oh, what would you like to hear? Would you like to hear? Oh, okay. My books are about things. They're interesting that it's things that people would never think. It's a cop's take on the way things go down, and behind the scenes things that you would never imagine. The cops off duty, their lives, the ridiculous things they get involved in. There's stories in there, how it works when cops are sick and injured, and how you get sometimes scam artists. Like, all right, I'll give you a perfect example. There was a guy. He was an Elvis impersonator in his spare time. He was a sergeant and bronze bodybuilder, and he was Portuguese. So we used to call him the Portuguese Elvis. So by day, he, was working in a precinct or working the desk. And by night, he was swinging his hips in Atlantic City for elderly people that liked Elvis. And his NYPD career seemed to be getting in the way. So he started suffering a series of mysterious injuries. Every time he'd go out on patrol, he got hurt. And, it was fairly obvious this guy was trying to get out on disability, and he played the game for years. And then on the day he was going to go for his disability hearing, he shows up with a cane and limping, but the guy looks like he just walked out of a bodybuilding competition. And, the NYPD medical board is not a sympathetic group. You do have a lot of injured cops from a variety of accidents and shootings that, they're looking to get disability. And then you've got the clowns that, they're not hurt. They're trying to, gauge the system. So anyway, Portuguese Elvis walks in with his a good looking girlfriend and a cane. And he's going on and on with his attorney, showing MRIs and all this stuff. And finally, the medical review board goes, stop. I can't. Look at this guy. He looks like he's come in first place in a bodybuilding competition. So Portuguese Elvis was denied his tax-free disability pension that year. But and he quietly retired, and now he's swinging his hips for, the residents of Atlantic City, New Jersey. So there's just ridiculous stories in there. You would never think there was another guy that we worked with that he was always trying to get disability. And we used to call him Whiplash Willie because he'd walk around with a cane and a foam collar. And he was in a fender bender. It was a minor fender bender, and he's trying to get out on disability. And he even got his wife into the act to sue his old partner that she claimed that it rendered him impotent. So, it pissed a lot of people off, and, a lot of people were making phone calls and dropping dimes on the guy. So the day he thought he was going to get his disability, they put I'm dating myself, a VHS cassette into a machine, and they had video of him at home. They followed him home, And basically they had him on his roof and doing yard work and unloading concrete through the
I
thing.
thought
So that's
your
another
back
guy.
hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So Whiplash Willie, he was another one that got denied the disability pension. I mean, my books aren't all about that, but that's just an example of just the ridiculous things cops get themselves involved in. There's another story in one of my books, NYPD Through the Looking Glass, where NYPD cops are paranoid about losing their firearm or their ID. If you lose your firearm, you're going to lose 30 vacation days and probably get put on a year of disciplinary probation where they can fire you for anything. So there was this one guy that was paranoid about losing his gun. He was going out one night. He lived in a crappy neighborhood and he didn't want to bring his gun with him. So he hid his gun in his apartment in the one place he thought a burglar wouldn't look, his oven. So 9 beers and 4 hours later, he comes back to his apartment tipsy. He's a little hungry and he decides he's going to make himself some frozen pizzas. So he preheats his oven to 425 and puts the television on and lays back. And about 15 minutes later, what happens? The bullets in his gun start going off and start shooting at him through the next room. So the guy had to call 911 on himself and run out of the apartment. And emergency service had to come and secure what was left of the gun that exploded in the stove. So it's the ridiculous things cops get involved in that you would never know about. I mean, there's a lot of crime stories in there and dark stuff, but I try to cover the human side of, cops getting in trouble and the ridiculous things they find themselves in.
I work at a gym facility, so there's a lot of cops that go in there, and I think that's the biggest thing is like recently everything's always bad cops. Actually, our town was trending because of a taser video, and I'm like, you got to look at both sides of the perspectives of everything. I mean, that's the whole point. Like body cam footage is great for that. It shows their perspective of things. You start to see like, oh, I see how this ended up this way.
Right.
But everybody wants to paint everything with a broad brush. I mean, if you listen to there's a really famous bodybuilder out there. His name's Ronnie Coleman, but he used to be a cop. And he was like, I would always look for someone to like, I always wanted to see something. I always wanted to have some action, but no one would mess with him. He was 0.3% body fat. That's less than 1%. He was Mr. Olympia 8 times. Big Jack dude worked for the police force. You wouldn't picture him. He had to cut his sleeve or cut his pants, everything to make shorts just so he could fit into it. He only cared about the gym membership, but the amount of like stories he tells about it, just his experience on the force for a couple of years. It's like stuff where like you wonder why everyone's walking around so like ready to pull the trigger. It's because you don't know what's going to happen. There's so much stuff that happens from shootings in my town. Things you're like, we're living in a beach town. And then nobody ever sees that perspective. I think that's important that you write about some of that stuff too. So people see like, hey, these are just people that are going through some crazy ass scenarios. I mean, it takes a lot to be a cop.
Oh yeah, and in today's climate, you've got to have thick skin. You've got to put up with a lot more. I mean, I'm out 15 years. I mean, and the world has changed. It's people, instead of just getting, I mean, in my day, when someone got pulled over, you either wrote them a ticket or gave them a warning. They weren't looking to make a TikTok video or become famous, or become a social media influencer because they're going to do something ridiculous with the police. I mean, think about it. You're pulling, think of it for a passenger perspective. And if you've got nothing to hide, I always tell people this. If you've got nothing to hide and everything's fine, I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to get a ticket. Listen, I don't want a ticket. It's a big pain in the ass. But at the end of the day, if the cop does something wrong, you get a lawyer and you sue him. I mean, why provoke somebody that's nervous to begin with a gun? I just don't get it. Like, and I was never a summons guy. I mean, the dirty little secret with the NYPD is they always say, well, there's no summons quotas. Well, that's a lie. You could go around, making 100 arrests a month and delivering babies. And if you didn't have 25 parking tickets written, 10 moving violations written, with 3 of them being red lights, you were going to get a subpar evaluation. So there is an emphasis on writing tickets, but you pick your spots. Most cops aren't big ticket writers, although every precinct or every police department will have a summons guy, and they're a different breed of character. And I hate to say this about cops, but it's true. Summons guys are the guys that got picked on in school. They didn't date a lot. They're a little antisocial. So they work by themselves and the power is in the pen. So, you get pulled over. I mean, if I pulled you over in my day, if you had all your paperwork and you were nice to me, or you had a good excuse, or you said you were sorry, I'm not going to write you a summons. There's just enough people out there that don't have insurance or scumbags and, that you're going to write a ticket to. I'm not going to bang a working guy or a woman, You know what I mean? Just to get my rocks off. But summons guys, they're a different breed of character. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is cops don't purposely going around screwing with anybody. They have no power. I mean, you're a civil servant. You're hoping to do a 20-year career and go home at the end of the day.
Yeah, nobody joins the force just because they want to hit somebody in the head with a police baton. I mean, the worst I've ever been like, I mean, I've had a gun put out on me before, but when it comes to a ticket, like the worst I've gotten on a ticket is I was driving over the speed limit by like 10 miles an hour because I had to take a shit. Like that was my honest answer I gave
Yeah.
the cop. I said, I have to go to the
Did
bathroom
he
right
let you
now.
go?
Yeah, he let me go. He
See,
was like,
I
I
mean,
understand.
yeah. I mean, you will get that one that's got to make his quota, or like I said, the antisocial one. There's cops that'll give other cops tickets, and it's funny because, like in my day, in the NYPD, you got to realize there's 77 or 78 police stations, right? So you get a phone call. We used to call it the phone call. So I'd get a phone call from a guy in another precinct, and he'd say, "Do you know this guy, this cop?" And I go, "What did he do now?" "He wrote my brother-in-law a ticket." And it's like, did your brother-in-law tell him? He goes, "Yeah, he had my PBA card." And he told him. I says, "All right, well, I can't do anything. I mean, the ticket's already written, but I'll talk to him." And then the guy will either, flip you off, or he'll tell you, "Oh, well," a lot of them will go, "Oh, I didn't know. He never said anything." And, I mean, again, this is 30 years ago and the world has changed. But the summons guys, if they messed with too many people, the cops in the locker room would put their locker in the shower and run the water on it. You know what I mean? I mean, they tell them like knock off the crap, stop banging everybody. But it's a different world now. I mean, you do that, you get fired. But yeah, back 30 years ago, the summons guys, if they were really banging, working people and stuff, the cops in the precinct would kind of police them, like tell them to knock that shit off.
Well, because nobody looks at like it was this cop. They look at it like it's all cops. That's how it
Oh
is
yeah, they're
nowadays.
making it difficult for everybody.
And it's like, no, it's not all cops. I know plenty of good ones. I know plenty of people that like I see every single day, talk to them. I know one of them just had a kid recently, but everyone goes, well, it's all cops are bad. I'm like, no, maybe you're getting a select minute few. Cause I think we've all been to school with some people who are like, oh my God, that guy's a cop because they're not fit for that position, but they like the power. They like
Oh
that whole
sure.
entire thing. That's not all of them, but people want to paint a broad brush and hope that it gets like every single cop's a bad. I'm like, why? Because you go on the internet and you type in cops and it's always going to be the bad stuff. Nobody talks about all the events that happen where like a cop skateboards with a bunch of kids. There was a cop that walked every single day for a whole year with a kid who had lost his dad in a tragic accident. Walked him every single day to school like his dad did. That doesn't get highlighted. It all has to be the stuff like the TikTok videos of kids, like you were saying about kids taking TikTok videos of being arrested or trying to find a way to piss off the cop. I'm not going to give you my ID. Why are you pulling me over? Why don't you just comply?
Because they're looking to be famous and they're looking to be controversial. And I don't get it. Like when I was a kid growing up in the Bronx, right? If we were doing something we weren't, the cops would come over and they'd give you a kick in the ass. And it happened to me several times. I didn't appreciate it, but I wasn't going to tell my father. If I went home, right? I get one time I got I wouldn't say like beat up, but smacked around a little bit, right? So and I was if I would have went home and go, "Dad, the cops came and they smacked us around," and my father would go, "What happened?" And what's a kid gonna say? Nothing. Well, I was just standing there, minding my. That's what every kid tells their parents. I did. I would, and I know what my father would say. Okay, we're gonna go to the police station. We're gonna find that cop. If his story is more believable than yours, you're going to catch another beating. And the reality is, why those cops came in? They warned us like 15 times. We were in a park. We weren't supposed to have beer. We had kegs. We had music. We were making a lot of noise. The neighbors were complaining, and we just kept flipping off the neighbors. And they warned us like 2 or 3 times. Then, like the third time, they came in there, man, and they broke the kegs. And whoever got grabbed got a kick in the ass. And if I would have told my father, I'm like, my father, well, wait a minute. Where were you? I wasn't supposed to be in that neighborhood. I wasn't supposed to be drinking alcohol. You know what I mean? So probably I told them that I was staying at a friend's house, which I wasn't. You know what I mean? So I would never think to run to my parents.
I think I was probably explained best to it, which recently now it's like you don't have to sue the state with a cop anymore. It's now you sue the cop personally. And one of the guys, I don't want to say his name, but one of the guys that goes to my gym is a cop, state trooper. He tells me, he goes, it's getting to now is when you get a call, they just 5 mile an hour it all the way to the
Sure.
site and clean up whatever's after, like whatever's left. I'm like, that's not good. We don't want that. We don't want to make it like that. He goes, well, it's so hard now. You go up, show up to the scene, do something. You get the one that gets the blame if something goes sideways on it. And I'm like, I've seen, see, with all the stuff you see on social media, I always tell people, try and look at the cop videos when people take these cop stunts that happen and you get to see a cop get shot and you wonder why they're so drastic in a lot of these actions, not just what the news shows you. Watch the perspective of that. When you can understand that, you understand like these aren't people, hopefully, that aren't going crazy. Maybe there's that one out there, but most of them are pretty reasonable. You can't just broad brush them off.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and just, I mean, I think a lot of things that's happening now is a lack of parenting. I really do. I think it's a lack of parenting, and these kids, they just don't have a lot of structure, and then they grow up that way, and I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong. They were wild kids when I was younger, but I mean, you just see stuff now. It's like they just look at it to be so controversial. It's like your life would be just so much easier if you just, mind your own business and do what you got to do and go about your life.
I think
And you're
that's
right. I mean, when cops stop becoming proactive, that's not good for society. Like you just said, to show up and clean up the mess. And I worked with, 30 years ago, I mean, I worked with guys like that and they weren't respected. Just as you said, like a burglary in progress, they're going to take their time going over there. They're going to pull up out front. They're going to get out of the car nice and slow. They're going to put on their hat. They're going to knock on the front door. You know what I mean? I mean, and we had no respect for those guys because they were cowards or lazy. They weren't going to pull up a half block away, go around the back. You know what I mean? Hoping you're going to catch the bad guy, go out the side of the house. You know what I mean? It's yeah, when cops stop becoming proactive, that's not good for society.
Well, that's why a lot of movies nowadays they don't focus on the cop aspect of things anymore. And all the newer ones focus on like if it's anything, it's like a bomb threat or it's something like disarming that. They don't focus on the whole aspect of like, oh, he's a detective and then this and this. And not even the crooked part, like he's a detective that lost his wife and decided to go above the law. There's not a whole lot of that going on the concept of it's so stigmatized right now in the state that we're in. Everything's trending when it comes to cops, or everything's trending at them in a bad light. Nobody wants to go see that. It's just only going to get more people upset. So directors don't even want to film it.
Yeah, Hollywood. I mean, I think and listen, I'm not an insider, but I mean, in my opinion, Hollywood hasn't been making good movies for the last 15 or 20 years. I mean, I can't watch a lot of the movies. I mean, the last movie
You
that
don't
I
like Fast
enjoyed,
Nine? Fast Nine?
I wouldn't even know what it looked like. It's the last movie I saw was The Irishman because I growing up in New York City and everything. I like Scorsese and De Niro and Pesci and I mean, it was entertaining. It wasn't a great movie, but it was good. And I've watched a couple of Clint Eastwood movies, but I can't get into. I guess I'm old, as far as I can't get into the Captain Americas, and they just don't do anything for me.
There's just a lot of it that's the same thing, just redone in a different manner. Like I'm a big fan of the Quentin Tarantino films. I think he does a
Yeah,
great like take
his
on.
early movies. Yes, I agree with you.
And I think like Hateful Eight was pretty good. I thought Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was very, very interesting. I mean, it's a good 2.5 hour movie with Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, but there's a lot of stuff now where it's like, yeah, it's just the same thing. There's nothing enticing me. I watched Fast Nine, and that's 9 episodes or 9 movies too long because now they're taking cars into space, and you're like, okay, I don't really understand what is this anymore. That's why it's memes all over the place now. It's just people mashing up Vin Diesel with like a picture of something because it's getting like to the point where it's like, is this what we've been dumbed down to? Like, where's the good stuff that's supposed to make you jump and not know what's going to happen next?
Yeah, well, I think Hollywood dumbs down the scripts because they make just as much, if not more, money overseas. So they're really catering to their audience overseas, and they don't want to piss them off or b excuse me, lose them in a plot because they're not going to get our culture.
Well, China, for instance, like they own so much of Hollywood. I mean, they basically own it. Like John Cena said that Taiwan was going to be the first country to see Fast Nine, and he was so excited for them. He had to make a public apology to China because they were
Oh,
going
he
to
looked like
boy.
a hostage. I saw that. He looked like he was a hostage.
He looked so scared. And I was like, and the fact that he speaks fluent Mandarin, I was like, what is going on? And you start to realize like I think the movie made $160 million like the first night it came out, and 30 million of that was American. And then the other 130 was from China. And you're like, Man, this is nuts, dude. Like, what is the whole point of all this anymore now? If you know, he didn't mean anything by it, but nobody wants to see intent. They hear what you say and they don't care what you felt in the moment. They just want to hold you against it.
Yeah, a lot of these companies, and not just Hollywood, but Nike. I mean, they're not worried about this country. They're making more money with them, and they're just kind of catering to them.
Well, China, I think, put a block on them because of the fact of they called them Asian hate because Nike saw that they shipped 13 tons of human hair off the coast of San Francisco. It was supposed to be shipment there, but we sent it back because all we did was ask where the human hair came from, and they capitalized on the Asian hate movement and said you're just being racist to us. And it's like, no, we know you have camps with Uyghur Muslims where you literally shave their heads off, and we know they weren't compensated for it, but they were like, you're racist for saying that. And it's like, well, I mean, come on. It's like, what are we saying now? And then Nike asked where their shoes, where the people that were picking their cotton for the shoes or picking the fabric or making them, they asked, like, hey, are you paying these people like a reasonable wage? And they put a block on Nike for that. They did the same thing with the NBA. Now they banned YouTube over there. And I'm like, it's just getting a crazy world where like everybody's more divided than we are together.
Yeah, you can't ask questions anymore. That's for sure.
I would like to read a book about somebody writing something about that stuff, at least dumbing it down for most people to understand.
Well, this show certainly asked a lot of questions, so I'm glad.
Well, like for instance, what's probably one of the worst things that you've experienced in your career, at least when you were a cop?
Oh God.
I didn't want to ask that question
No, it's
because that
fine.
sounds so
No, no, no,
terrible.
no, 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 it's fine. 9/11 wasn't good, but by the time 9/11 rolled around, I had like 13 or 14 years in with the NYPD, so I had seen quite a bit. You're able to compartmentalize. I was down there walking around on the ground probably by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it looked like something out of a movie. I mean, it was just this white dust covering everything and just papers and things flying around. It looked like something like out of a movie, like a nuclear explosion. And the one thing that I'll never forget walking down Broadway with all that dust covering everything was thousands upon thousands of pairs of women's shoes. Because the women that worked in the financial district, when they were fleeing, just took their high heeled shoes off and said, screw this, and took off running. So there's women's shoes all over the place. It's just, that's something that I'll never forget. What saved my life was I had court that day. We had locked up this guy that was going to give us information about an employee in Department of Motor Vehicles that was pushing out good, phony driver's licenses. So I was supposed to be down there by 9 a.m. and my office was up in the Bronx, and my sergeant and I were going to take a ride down there. Well, my sergeant was late. He was late probably about 45 minutes to an hour, and I was pissed. I was waiting on him, and he came through the door, and I said, "Hey, come on, we got to get down there." And he goes, "Yeah, yeah, 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 yeah." And one of the cops was watching television and said, "Hey, a plane just hit the World Trade Center." So we were watching, the first plane that hit, and then the second plane hit. So we knew it was terrorism, and they threw us into uniform, and we were down there walking around by, like I said, by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But that probably saved my life because I would have been down at court, which was literally blocks away. So I would have run over there, and who knows, I might have been crushed in the rubble.
That's intense because I've heard so many like crazy stories. I have that episode number coming up, 9/11. I was going to do something special for that, but I never even thought about the shoes thing. I've never heard that before ever.
Oh yeah, it was all women, thousands. If you ever get, if go look around, see if you can see if there's photos. It was, we were coming down Broadway, I think.
Let's say everything you look up now is like conspiracy theories to it, which I'm like, look, I gotta have one person on to talk about that on the episode with a couple of people whose stories who were actually there. But man, it's so hard because they say the phone call, for instance, they say like, how can you call on a plane? They have like exact things of like the family calling, and then the government was like, yeah, we actually like recreated that scenario. It's not the actual phone call from inside of the plane. It's like, well, now you've opened up the door for everything to kind of be false now.
Yeah, I mean, I know what I know. I mean, I was down there. I mean, I saw quite a bit. The wild thing is, like a couple of years after 9/11, I took a course in dignitary protection, and they were just, showing us terrorist mindsets and what to look for and stuff. One of the wildest things I ever saw was there was a photo. They showed us a photo. A guy was on like a month or two, a couple of months before 9/11. A husband and wife were on a flight, and the wife was taking a picture of a husband who's sitting in the seat on the plane, and he's got this big shit-eating grin, like he's just smiling. Sitting right next to him is Mohammed Atta, which was the main guy in 9/11. He's sitting next to this guy who's got this big shitty grin, and he's got like that 1,000-yard stare, man. He's just looking straight ahead. And it was just so telling. I'll never forget that photo. I mean, it was the wildest thing that they were probably doing a test run. You know what I mean? Like, because they were flying back and forth from New York to Los Angeles, New York to San Francisco, because those are the flights, the flights with the most fuel, the biggest planes. So that photo that was taken just several months earlier, a husband, you know, probably after 9/11, Mohammed Atta's photo was everywhere. And this guy goes, wait a minute, that's him. And it was him. I mean, it was the wildest photo.
Yeah, that's so nuts, man. Because that's such I think that's like we don't have a whole lot of events that have happened that actually unite, like where everybody puts their differences aside and kind of like figures out like this moment hurt us all. This wasn't just a
Oh,
one-on-one thing.
yeah.
This was, and we don't have any of that now. Like that's like during COVID, sure. Like first 2 weeks was like, let's go try and get people groceries who are susceptible to it. And then everything became like, hey, wear a fucking mask. Like it all went down the shitter.
Quick, right? Yeah. You're 100% right. You are right. That changed real fast.
And I was like, hey, look, if you've ever been in a near-death experience, you know that like first, whatever, 2 weeks after that or a week after that, you're a whole like life is beautiful, everything's amazing. Then you're back to your old ways. That was exactly what happened. I was like, let's not let that happen in the beginning, but it went right back to it. And now
that's very true. Yeah, you're 100%. That is very true. I remember right after 9/11, like, you know, people like letting other people go in traffic. Oh no, go ahead. You know, people waving to you. Right. And right, like you said. And well, the funny thing is, right. I don't know, a week or two after 9/11, they were running us down in teams and we were doing what's called the bucket brigade. So you'd get down there, you get assigned, and we were like ants going up the pile in rows. And, you know, they were coming down with buckets, and you'd take the buckets down to debris and it would get sifted through and everything. And we were coming up we were doing 12-hour shifts, and we're coming up the West Side Highway, and, you know, Manhattan residents are cheering us and waving and, you know, blowing their horns like, oh, that's really nice. We got up to the Bronx about a half block from our precinct, and a gypsy cab cut us off and gave us the finger. I go, well, we're scumbags again. And it was just that quick.
That's great. Oh God. I mean, I guess, you know, I'd rather people I get it because of the tragic incident or something happens and then everyone gets like that, but it doesn't stay that way. I mean, I called it when it first started happening, but I mean, is it a sign that it's better when it's back to how it was before and people are cutting each other off in traffic and just being angry? I'd rather them get their anger out there than take it out like in physical. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's just human nature. We're contrarian. You know, we love to complain. You know, I mean, and people that are too cheery get on my nerves, and people that are too negative get on my nerves. You know, I'll deal with the people that are too cheery than, you know, Oscar the Grouch all the time. Oh, and to answer your question, you were asking me like most disturbing. So I'll give you a story. So probably had about 3 or 4 years in, it comes over as domestic. It was a rainy night and it was slow. It's like a Tuesday night. It was very slow on a 4 to 12, and comes over as a domestic. So one car answers it. They're on their way. Then the dispatcher goes, I'm getting multiple calls on this. So now, you know, it's heavy. If multiple people in the building are calling up, you know, there's something to it. So myself and another car are coming. So there's 3 cars coming. So when the first car gets there, it was like 3-story. It was like a 3-story complex, multiple apartments, and they're all, I don't think, more than 3 or 4 stories high. So the first car gets there, and as they get out of the car, they hear screaming coming out a window. So what provoked them to do this? I have no idea. I've never seen it before. I've never seen it again. They decided to go up the fire escape. Which is unusual, but they did. When they got up on the fire escape, they look in through the window, and the woman is laying on the ground, and her boyfriend is standing above her, and he's trying to cut her head off. So they start screaming into the radio, he's cutting her head off, blah, 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 blah. So now everybody's like, the cavalry's coming, right? We pull up to the building. We're running through the courtyard, and you're hearing bam, bam, bam. You're hearing several shots go off. So we get up the stairs. We're pounding on the door, and the cops are in the apartment. They're like, "Don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot. It's us, it's us." We said, "All right, open the door." So we opened the door, and it looked like something like Hollywood could not have done this justice. So, long story short, this guy had lost his mind. I guess the girlfriend was going to leave him. He partially severed her head. He put a hole in her head with a hammer, like there was a hole in the side of her head. Her neck was basically gone. I mean, and you know, when they show in the movies where someone dead and their eyes are closed, no, she had that look like she was screaming when he finished her off. The blood, we were walking around the apartment and you could feel your feet just glued to the floor because blood congeals after a couple of minutes in oxygen, right? So you're walking and your feet are just sticking to the floor. And this guy was going to hell. He knew he was going to hell. There was not one thing in that apartment that wasn't broken, from the toilet to the sink. He took that hammer and he put it in every television set, every wall. There wasn't one thing in that apartment. It was like a tornado went through it. And, you know, that was probably one of the most violent things I ever seen. Now, the wild part of that story is the two cops that were on the fire.
Wait, hold on. That's not the wild part. Jesus.
No, it gets better. Well, I wouldn't say, well, nothing in the story gets better, but it gets more unusual. So the two cops are on the fire escape as he's decapitating this woman, and they start banging on the glass. You know, "You son of a bitch." You know, the guy goes, "Oh, you want some of this?" He jumps up with the knife and comes running over to them. This is like people are saying cops are trigger. They haven't even shot this guy yet. He picks up the knife. He comes running towards the window. He opens the window and he starts lunging out the window with a carving knife. And a friend of mine lets him have it, hits him 4 or 5 times with a 38. The guy goes stumbling back into the apartment backwards. He falls backwards. And my buddy tells the guy that shot him, goes, the wildest thing is when he falls backwards, he falls down, the knife comes out of his hand and spins and goes into the kitchen. And he goes, I say to myself, and this is a cop's mindset. Oh shit, they're not going to believe me that he was armed. You know, you got a decapitated woman.
Oh my God.
Right. That's a cop's mindset because you're always afraid to get in trouble. So for those of you out there that think the cops just can't wait to shoot somebody, that's in one of my books. It just opens up a can of worms. When you shoot somebody, you get involved in a shooting, you got prosecutors talking to you with stenographers. Your own department is questioning you. I mean, it's just endless. And this guy's afraid. I mean, he's a hero. He just killed a guy that murdered a woman, and he's afraid because the knife fell out of the guy's hand when he hit the floor and went into the next room. So we're in the hospital with this cop, and he's looking at his pants because cops usually wear baggy pants. He had nicked his pants with the knife. There was a slit mark through the side of his pants, so we almost got him in the leg.
Jeez, dude. All right, so that's crazy because I never even would have thought to even, because you know somebody's going to question him afterwards and be like, all right, when did you fire? Was he armed at that point? Because the knife was all the way in the kitchen. I'm not even thinking about that. I'm thinking about this. There's all these fucking holes. Tim the tool man's got to come in and fix all the holes. No. And then there's what? You got a body on the floor, but that's not enough evidence. They still got to question you about that.
Oh, like for the sergeant, first thing, how many rounds were fired? Because we were bringing the cop to the hospital because they were in trauma. And so first thing the sergeant, you know, and so this particular shooting happened in a precinct where everybody knew each other, right? So the sergeant knows who was involved in everything. First of all, how many shots were fired? I go, I don't know. He goes, did he make it? I go, nah. I go, he's dead as Dillinger. And I go, she's gone too. I mean, but you have to have an ambulance coming from pronounce him dead. You just can't pronounce somebody dead yourself. You have an ambulance coming, then the ME comes. Oh yeah, forget it. You get involved in a shooting, prosecutors, it's just that they take your guns. I mean, it's people think, you know, on television, like, oh, you know, this cop shot this guy for no reason. Well, if he did, I can guarantee you it's going to come out in the wash. It is scrutinized and looked at and by more agencies. And I mean, it's nonsense. The days of covering things up, this isn't the Deep South, you know, in the 60s, where someone that the local yokel sheriff didn't like winds up in a ditch at the end of town. It's just, it's impossible.
How long till you started to notice when you started to get numb to it all? Like, was it your first year?
I don't think it's not that you're numb. you figure you should figure things out. Now, some cops don't figure it out and they're miserable. Because I worked with guys early in my career that were not, nice guys, upbeat, and then you see them after 20 years, and it's like, it's like termites got to them. Like, what the fuck, like just they're miserable. Um, I think the secret to my success was I always moved around. If I was in a place too long, I says, well, I want to learn something else. Police work, there's so many different things you can do. And I was always fascinated in the different facets of things. So I would move. So I was in a unit that was targeting pickpockets and robberies, and I did that. Then I went to narcotics for a while. Then I was in auto crime for a while. I got stuck at a DWI unit, which I hated. Oh, I hated that. I did that for about a year and a half. I was miserable because dealing with drunks, there's no winning. They're either going to cry, they're going to fight, or they're going to piss in the backseat of the police car. It's pick your poison.
I look at that like, man. So, okay. So after retiring and everything too, when did you decide that you should put these into book form? Because I can see you got, obviously it would have a lot of content to talk about. Like you get a story triggered, but when did you decide, like, was it just like retirement after a while? It seems like it's probably not the same. And it's like an adrenaline thing the whole time you're a cop too. I mean, every day is like a new adventure type thing. And you don't know if it's going to be your last, you don't know if you're going to have the next day. When did it, like, just, was it a couple weeks in, you were just like, maybe I should try doing something else? And you don't seem like the golfing type.
No, not really. I always wanted to write. I've had a very interesting childhood, very, very interesting. Growing up in the Bronx in the 1970s, I mean, I've had a very interesting childhood, to say the least. And I always wanted to write a book about my childhood. And when I retired, I said, I'm going to write a book about my childhood. And I started it. And then one of my friends said to me one day, he goes, and he's not a cop. He goes, you should really write a book about your police experiences. And I didn't think that I could. And I was also afraid of, the one thing I said when I was going to start writing these police books was, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, embarrassed, or divorced. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, my books are tell all, but I change the names, I change the dates, I change the ranks, I change the units. I get phone calls all the time after I write a book from my friends. Like, I know who you're talking about. Like, well, but they're like, you kind of handle him with kid gloves. I'm like, I mean, he did something stupid. There's no need to really bury the guy, And if I really didn't like somebody in my career, I don't write about him. I feel that's the best. Why revisit that? If I didn't really like you to begin with, or I'm not going to use this as a bully pulpit. It's there's more than enough stories in my career. But anyway, my friends told me I had a lot of interesting stories, and I can't write in chronological order. So my books, so you can pick them up at any point and say, oh, okay, each chapter's probably got 5 or 6 stories in it with content to that type of chapter. Like, one of my books has Crossing Over to the Dark Side. So that's got a bunch of dirty cops that I either worked with or knew or heard stories about. Or, there's another, in this new book, NYPD Law and Disorder, there's a chapter called Moonlighting. And it's all these cops that had all these side jobs doing ridiculous shit off duty. And like, there was a guy, Bobby Bagels. Bobby Bagels owned a bakery in Long Island, and he did day tours. And Bobby Bagels, if he left work 5 minutes late, his world would come crumbling down. Like, he had the traffic patterns over the Throgs Neck Bridge to a science, that if he didn't make it over there, he didn't have enough time to catch a nap and then cook bagels all night. And the guy was short round, and he had the physique of a burnt Bialy. And he would pay other cops to handle his jobs. Like, if an arrest came up, like, he wasn't taking it. He'd beg, borrow, oh, please just take this collar from me, And then, so it got so bad that one time his sergeant was complaining to him because you had these homeless squeegee guys in his sector that were harassing motorists. Like, in New York City, you get these homeless people, you stop at a light, they'll come up to your car and they'll grab your windshields with one hand, and they got a squeegee, and they go, hey, give me $1 and I'll wash your window. If you don't pay them, they'll break off your windshield wiper or hit you in the face with a squeegee if you got your window open. So they're an annoyance. So, cops that did their job, you chase them or you lock them up. Well, Bobby Bagels, his sergeant is complaining to him about these squeegee men in his sector. And Bobby Bagels turns around and goes, Jesus Christ, I paid those guys $5 each last week to move into the next precinct. Like that's how he was paying people, even the criminals, he was paying just so he could cook his bagels all night long. So I mean that's a story from one of my NYPD Law and Disorder, and then there's just like the crazy shit that guys got themselves involved in.
How many books do you have?
I've written 5. I'm starting my 6th. 4 NYPD, and my first book, Dickheads and Debauchery and Other Ingenious Ways to Die, is about the ridiculous things people do to shorten their life expectancy.
Okay. Um, with the for the sixth one, for instance, now each book doesn't go in chronological order, but are you doing it for like your years of like each book is like kind of like this is like my first couple of years, then my second book's my next couple of years, and they're
No,
all
it's
different
almost
events?
no. I actually write like Seinfeld. If I'll think of it, because I talk to my friends, and one of my friends will say, "Remember that guy?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I remember him." And then that'll spark a story, right? So then I'll note to self, write about this, and then when I have enough of those, I just start drafting them and growing them. And each of my books are about 240 pages, and they're not in chronological order or anything like that. It's like Seinfeld. You just can pick it up at any point, and it's just the ridiculous things and guys I worked with and things, just things that they got themselves involved in that people would think are funny.
Do you have something that you wouldn't include in one of your books?
I'm sorry.
Do you have something that you won't include in one of your books, like something that's a little bit too much?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, this last book, I had a couple of stories, and I'm like, I'm really not looking to poke the bear, and I don't want to get canceled on Amazon. And it's true, because if Amazon finds the content a little too risque or woke, they'll zap your book. So I don't need that headache. You know what I mean? So
I'm wondering what censors those are, because for podcasting and things like on YouTube and stuff, there's censors that you can't say. Like you couldn't talk about the lab theory or the idea that this virus came from a lab, or even bring
right,
up the
right,
word lab, or they would just take you off. They're like, no, we're not having any of that. Social media is like that too. A lot of political stuff is usually skewed one way rather than looking
correct.
at both sides.
Yeah. So like I said, there were a couple of stories that I had to tweak or out and out remove. It'll probably be a story I could tell at a party, but I wouldn't put it in one of my books or a podcast, because I just don't need the headache.
You don't need all the people that get mad at what you say.
Correct. I want to sell books, and it's like people like, oh, you enjoying this? I'm like, I want to make the money selling books, and I enjoy selling books. I don't necessarily want to be famous. That's not really my thing. I enjoy writing. I find it therapeutic. It makes me laugh, makes my friends laugh, makes my family laugh, and you're not going to get rich writing books unless you're Stephen King or James Patterson.
Yeah.
But it provides a steady stream of income. I'm not going to get rich off it, but it's fun.
Plus, if you enjoy doing it too, I mean, like, what's your process? Do you have to wait till like a story gets triggered by like a friend brings up something, remember that, and then you're able to trigger it, or you just have random moments where you remember something, have to
Both,
write it down?
both. Yeah, I've got like a bullpen where I just throw. I got a thing in my laptop titled under Boneyard. A boneyard in the auto theft industry is like where they keep all the stolen fenders and stuff. So I'll throw characters or things to come back to another day. And then there's stuff that I'll just grow, like I'll have 6 or 7 chapters unfinished. And if I hit writer's block, I go to another chapter. I'll just jump to another chapter. I mean, there are times when the book's, getting close to completion that I've got to, it's like doing your homework as a kid. I just got to bear down and get through this and make this more appealing or more funny, or just take it out if it's not working. This, okay, I'm sorry.
About to say, do you have anything, for instance, like when you're writing a book and you feel like you're moving on to a next chapter? Does it get more difficult because you kind of have to censor, and do you base it off of like just writing in the moment, and then you have someone edit it later, or you do all the editing yourself?
No, I can't edit. What I do, well, I go through it a million times. I mean, I try to, so I'll send it off to, I have a company that does a copy edit and then a proofread. So I comb through my books 10, 15 times. I mean, the content is there, and it takes me a good 2-3 months that I keep going through it, because I really want to get it as close to like as perfect in my mind before it goes to the copy edit. And then the copy edit, they'll have it for a week or 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'll get it back with all the red marks. It brings back memories of school when the teacher would give you your paper back with all the grease pen. And depending on my last book, the copy editor didn't really get my sense of humor. So there were a couple of things that he or she was, they didn't get it. I'm like, no, I'm going to leave that in there because that is funny. You just don't have the sense of humor. Not everything, but a couple of things. You have creative differences. And then I get it back. I comb through it. I accept or I deny the changes. And then it goes for a proofread, which is more grammar.
Do you have for instance, like give me like how many chapters would you include in a book?
My books are usually 15 to 17, 18 chapters.
How many stories do you got?
Well, all right. So just I got my book right here. So NYPD Law and Disorder. There are 15 chapters, and then I have the NYPD movie guide and NYPD glossary, and then about the author. And each chapter probably has anywhere between 1 or 2 to 6 or 7 stories.
Holy crap, man. I see someone's called me an orator, like a storyteller before, but I'm like, I don't know if I have stories. I just have experiences and stuff. And I get that's maybe a story, but it's like you have to bring up something that triggers that memory for me to be able to run
Absolutely.
into it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to.
There's things. And then I'll have stories and I'll move them around from different chapters. So there was one of the chapters I had in one of my books was death. And I was explaining the process when you're a rookie cop, and rookie cops always get shit on. And the old timers, you show up at a DOA, and the old timers will flip you a thin pair of latex gloves and go ahead, kid, because you got to search a stiff for identification. Sometimes if they die in the street or they die in an apartment, you don't know who they are. If they have valuables, you have to voucher it. And I was building out a story about death, and then it provoked a story. And there was this rookie cop when I had about 2 or 3 years in. He was an undertaker. He was an undertaker before he was a cop. And I used to tell him, I go, you should put in for the missing persons unit. I says, because they'd put you to work, because the missing persons unit, what they do is people die in New York City in hospitals with no identification. They die in the street with no identification. So the people from the missing persons unit do is they go down to the morgue and they fingerprint the DOAs and they try to figure out who they were and do they have next of kin. So the guy took my advice. He went to the missing persons unit. He became a detective. And like New York City Police Department, there's 35,000 members. So it's so easy you won't run into a guy for 10, 15, 20 years. And 15 years later, my partner said to me, he goes, I ran into a buddy of yours. I go, who? So he says the guy's name. And I go, oh, yeah, he's in missing persons unit. He goes, no. He goes, he left the job. He says, what do you mean he left the job? He goes, he's my dentist. I go, wait a minute. What are you talking about? He goes, he got bored with the missing persons unit. He resigned. He went to dentist school. He goes, and now he's my dentist. He goes, and then it's funny. He goes, he spoke very highly of you. He goes, if you ever need any dental work, he told you to come see me. And like I write in the book, I go, I think I'm going to pass. I mean, as much as I'm sure he's an intelligent person, but I know where his hands have been. I don't want his fingers in my mouth. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it just kind of creeped me out.
That's nuts, man. That's like being a librarian and then going to like working at NASA and astrophysics or something like that. It's like, that's a big leap.
That particular guy had a very high IQ. You could see it. Like if he wanted to be a pilot, he could be a pilot. He's just one of I've worked with a couple of guys like that just whatever they put their mind to do, they could do. And I'm like, what are you doing here?
Yeah. Have you ever tried to like talk to anybody like what you could do better than this? Like I know the cop thing. I mean, that's a very high like regard and protection and everything like that. But I mean, Marines, people consider Marines dumb. And I'm like, but that's some of the bravest stuff to be online. He goes, well, you don't really need to be high educated to be a Marine. And I'm like, yeah, but that's like the toughest thing, being on the front lines of everything.
Oh, hells yeah. And you gotta use your head, I would imagine, in combat. Because if you're not intelligent in combat, you might not going to be around too long, right? I mean, anything can happen in a gunfight, but I mean, you've got to know angles and try to predict what your adversary is going to do next. I wouldn't write the Marines off as unintelligent at all.
Yeah, but most people do. And especially like when you come into like the Marine Corps or you go into the Army or anything like that, everyone talks trash in every single branch. Like Air Force has the best stuff. They're like high intelligent because you need like a 90% above and whatever your test is. And I'm like, man, you're all kind of doing like the same thing in different areas or different things. But I mean, to knock each other, I guess it's like a bragging right of like, oh, I'm in the Air Force or something. But I look at it like, man, there are some people that aren't fit to like I work at the gym, for instance. There are some people like you don't really fit here. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, you're a fitness guy, sure, but you're not like how these people are just kind of looking for a job. You're like you seem like you talk really well. Why don't you do radio or something? I'm like, I don't really want to do radio. Kind of just trying to find where that fit is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people tend to put you in a box, and think they've got you all figured out, and they don't, So, and don't ever let somebody pigeonhole you.
Yeah, I think the best thing is kind of being unpredictable in a way, like trying to figure out like what's the next thing you can strive to. One day you didn't know when you started being a cop that one day you were going to end up being an author at some point. Maybe that's what you want to do in
Not
the
at
beginning.
all. No, not you're right. You're 100% right. The thought never entered my mind.
It's crazy how kind of life works out.
Well, I like to challenge myself. I'm always doing different projects around the house. I'm always watching YouTube videos on how to fix things, or I'm the guy. Something goes wrong with my car, I try to fix it myself. And then if it just becomes too much of a hassle, then I got to bring it to somebody, because at the end of the day, you got to factor in your time, and that's the time you're never going to get back. You might save a couple of bucks, but you're never going to get that time back. So if I can't do it I give myself a certain amount of time if I could figure something out or not, and I'll either come back to it when I have more time, or that's it. I'll just pay somebody to do it.
Yeah, I mean, most of the world, when the power goes out, you just wait for it to come back on. But what happens if it's not coming back on? You got to be able to figure it out for
Right.
yourself.
Right. You got to be able to use your gas grill to cook. Hopefully you got enough canned goods. And I'm in Florida, so we just dodged. Well, we thought it was going to be a hurricane, then we thought it was going to be a tropical storm, and then
Yeah,
it
I'm up
was
in
actually
Maryland.
nothing.
That's hitting us right now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. We
Yeah,
got
it was nothing.
a tornado thing. Yeah, I messaged a buddy out there in Florida. I was like, hey man, like I hope you're doing okay. He's like, dude, it's sunny as shit here. I'm like, all right, that just means it's coming up the coast to us.
Yeah, it hit us about 2 a.m. And then I passed out. I was sleepy, and then I got up at 4 to use the bathroom. I didn't even hear rain. It's
Oh,
like
the
nothing.
Weather Channel. They'll tell you it's going to be sunny one day, then it snows that day.
Yeah, I mean, I get they got a job to do, but they scare the shit out of you. And then what happens is you get numb to it. And then, you got to hunker down. You got to hunker down. And it's like, this show in the hurricane, this could be a 4 or 5. And that's how people get hurt, because you're numb to it. You're like, yeah, screw
That's what
this. I ain't
happened
going
with
anywhere.
what is it? Hurricane Sandy that came through in Ocean City. Completely like nobody was evacuating. And then the last minute, like, oh my God, we got to put up sandbags, block it because this whole place is going to flood. And everyone started freaking out last minute. I'm like, all right, great. This is gonna be heck trying to get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, they wear you down.
Well, Vic, you've given me enough of your time, man. Where can people find your links, like where they can find your books and stuff?
Yeah. If you go on Amazon and just go to books and type in either Vic Ferrari or NYPD Law and Disorder, or the NYPD's Flying Circus, Cops, Crime, and Chaos, Grand Theft Auto, the NYPD's Auto Crime Division, or NYPD Through the Looking Glass, Stories from Inside America's Police Department. My books will come out. I got a Facebook page. I have a Twitter page, just at Vic Ferrari 50 on Twitter. I'm pretty easy to find. And my books, like I said, they're not War and Peace, but they're just loaded with interesting stories about law enforcement and the ridiculous things that happen to cops during the course of their careers.
And I make sure I link everything in the description. And thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.